And J.K. Rowling has defended a girl reportedly hounded out of school for questioning trans ideology. The Times reported this week that an unnamed sixth former quit school after being spat and screamed at by a mob of pupils simply because she had challenged a visiting speaker who doubted biology's significance when defining women. This worrying incident comes hot on the heels of several of our politicians being unable to say women can't have a penis and the raging debate around trans women in sport. Now, Sharron Davies, your brave efforts to protect women's sport have seen you suffer hideous, absolutely hideous abuse. But when this enters into schools, this is a real battle now, isn't it, to maintain not just sanity, but also science.
Yeah, it's the science side of it that really worries me. You know, we should be teaching in school facts and as you say, science, and biology is one of those sciences. Sex is immutable. There are only two sexes, a male and a female. One produces a large gamete, one produces a small gamete. We need one of each to reproduce, and that is the truth. And the fact that, you know, the story that you mentioned then has so many things that are wrong with it. One, that a whole school of girls believes that that's not the case. Another one is that someone was invited into the school to tell them that sex doesn't exist. And the worst one is the fact that, you know, free speech is allowed in this country. And for a sixth former who just wanted to debate this subject, she was hounded by 60 other kids, you know, other teenagers, because I presume most of them were sixth formers as well, and spat at and bullied out of her school for having her opinion, which legally she's totally entitled to. That's really worrying, you know, that was allowed to happen in a school in Great Britain.
Well, exactly, because what message, Sharron, does that send to every other young woman at school? We know what the message is. Zip it. Don't say a thing, stay quiet, don't like tweets from Sharron Davies, don't retweet J.K. Rowling, because if you do, we're going to come for you. And it's chilling.
Yeah, I think it's really chilling for them, you know, for the young girls, to be honest with you. You know, we've had a massive increase in transgender, gender dysphoria in young girls, a 4,000% increase, which is just phenomenal. Now, that isn't people that have gender dysphoria. That is a form of gender contagion that's going on inside of schools. So because we're now working so hard on narrowing stereotypes, you know, and this comes from reality TV, from people thinking that if you're a female, you have to look like Kim Kardashian, where you can be female and look like anything. You know, that's the whole point. I grew up in the 80s where my parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be. And I spent most of my youth with short hair, smelling of chlorine, training with the boys, or up a tree. You know, and I would have been nowadays told that I was a boy. I was never a boy. I just liked to do kind of boyish things, which was absolutely fine. But we've lost that ability for people to be whatever they want to be inside of the actual sex that they are. We seem to have to box everybody and narrow our stereotypes, which to me seems to be incredibly regressive, not progressive.
Well, I think you've just hit upon a key point, Sharron, that 4,000% statistic, because I had Cara Bell on the show earlier this week, someone who J.K. Rowling has also praised as being an absolute hero of this movement to protect female rights. And of course, she was one of those statistics, Sharron. She was told that because she was having these feelings, she must be a boy, and she went through the puberty blockers, she went through the double mastectomy, and actually, she was a lesbian woman. And she was a lesbian woman all alone with her hormones exploding. And the problem is, and the reason why it's very relevant to this story, Sharron, is all of that takes place during those teenage years where you're influenced by what's going on at school.
Yes, absolutely. Puberty is a horrible time. You know, all of us have got stories about our horrible period in life, you know, where we were pubescent and we were changing our bodies, and for women having periods and all sorts of things that were just horrible, you know, and you're moody. I mean, you know, I've got a 15-year-old son, and if I can get him to grunt at me 3 times a day, I'm doing really well. Boys and girls have very, very different puberties. You know, he's bursting with testosterone at the moment, which is affecting his skin and everything. And I know that I was a nightmare when I was a teenager. My poor parents, you know, my poor mum especially, because you're an emotional roller coaster as a girl in particular. And this is what puberty is. And if we stop our youngsters going through puberty and coming out the other side, and we give them puberty blockers, which doesn't enable their brains to mature, I'm honestly not sure that we're helping them. Historically, gender dysphoria, 85% of the gender dysphoria, people that show symptoms, grow out of it if they're just given verbal therapy. But nowadays, with puberty blockers, that's not the case. And once you put young people on cross-sex hormones, particularly girls, when they're given testosterone, it's very difficult. As with Kira, as Kira explained, you can't reverse that wholeheartedly. With guys, if you put them on estrogen and then they come off it, testosterone is much a stronger hormone. That tends to take over again. But with girls, once you've given young girls a 5 o'clock shadow and a deeper voice and an Adam's apple, it's really hard to reverse that. And as you mentioned, double mastectomies, I don't understand how anyone under the age of 18 could even be considering these things, because these drugs will create sterility. If you're not old enough to decide you can have a cigarette or a drink or get married or drive a car, how are you old enough to decide that you want to be sterile for the rest of your life? These are questions that we need to be talking about, at least. And closing down debate is the bad side of what has been going on. If there's nothing to hide, then there's no reason why we can't talk about it. The good news is, in sport, I do think we are winning the battle. I think a lot of the governing bodies now are seeing exactly what we've been talking about was going to happen for the last 3 or 4 years. There was a young skateboarder that's just come out today and started talking about losing prize money. So it's affecting their livelihoods as well, which means that we actually have somewhere to go with the courts, because this is sex discrimination. If you're stopping people from earning their living, as well as obviously, winning medals. So I think we're beginning to see the sporting world wake up, and I'm hoping very much in the next 2 or 3 weeks that swimming is going to come out and change the rules.
Yeah, and you have been a huge part of that conversation when it comes to sport. So how do we do the same thing in schools now? Because clearly that is going to be one of the next battlegrounds in the rights for women.
I think it's really important that the government, withholds the laws that we have in place, which does protect freedom of speech, which does protect sex as a protected characteristic, and comes down on the schools to do their jobs properly. This school needs to be investigated in the fact that they didn't stop bullying. You can't have bullying one way. Bullying has got to be across everybody. You can't just turn around and say, because you're a minority, we're going to protect you. But if you're not the minority, well, anything can happen to you. Nobody should be bullied in any schools in our country.
Couldn't agree more. And look, the first words from the Education Secretary, Nadine Zahawi, on this have been positive. But I think we're going to have to keep on this issue, because how many other schools has this happened in? How many other girls have just kept quiet? How many teachers are too afraid to talk about this issue because they know the reaction they're going to get from certain sections of the student body? So, Sharron Davis, we will keep on this issue. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
You're welcome. Always nice to see you.
Thanks, Sharron.